Hi everyone, I'm Shelly from There's No Place Like Home at redheadmom8.wordpress.com. When I was little, I used to love playing school. I have two nieces who are very close in age to me, so they were more like sisters. So whenever they would come over to my house, I would more or less hold them captive and make them play school with me. And I was never the student. I always had to be the teacher because I just loved giving them spelling assignments and math quizzes and taking attendance and doing all of that schoolish type stuff. And actually, I was one of those kids who just really did well in school. I can't say that I was really interested in it because a lot of the stuff really bored me, and I honestly have no idea, actually no recollection of a lot of the stuff that I actually learned. But I knew how to play the school game well. I knew how to take tests. I knew how to memorize things. So, I looking back on my school years, I can't say that they're really a bad memory for me because I was able to get through it all in one piece. So when it came time that I decided that I was going to homeschool my children, it should be no surprise to you that I just decided to do it. Well, actually, the only way I knew to do it was just to replicate school. And I think that most of us do have this picture in our heads of what school is supposed to look like, even homeschool. We picture a chalkboard and we picture separate subjects and kids raising their hands and the Pledge of Allegiance, and all of those memories that you have of school were the things that I wanted to incorporate into my homeschool because I didn't know any other way, and because I thought, hey, I was so good at school, how could I possibly mess this up? Well, I did mess it up. And I've got to say that I did have some people when I started homeschooling. I had a family who offered to let me come and watch them homeschool, and they were actually using 5 in a row. And I declined because I thought, yeah, this is a piece of cake. I was so good at school. I don't need help. I know what I'm doing. Well, when I started homeschooling, I went and got these little secondhand desks from the thrift store they were school desks, and we had a little classroom with educational posters all over the walls, and I had a chalkboard, and right next to that was a whiteboard, and we had a flag for the Pledge of Allegiance and a little globe on the windowsill. And I'm going to admit that I used to make my kids raise their hands whenever they had to go to the bathroom or wanted to ask a question or needed help with something. I really did school. Like, I didn't just do homeschool, I did school. And this lasted for a while. I was all excited about it because to me, I was still playing school, except this time it really mattered. My kids, on the other hand, were not thrilled about this because I pulled them out of school with all these promises of how much fun we were going to have at home learning together, and all I did was just take them out of school and do everything that they were doing in school to begin with. So no, they weren't happy campers. And my oldest son, at one point, he asked me if he could go to public school for high school because at this time none of my kids liked being homeschooled anymore. And I really got burned out. This was about 2 years after we started homeschooling. I was burned out. My kids weren't happy. I was completely stressed out from doing separate subjects for all of the separate kids. And at this time, how many kids was I homeschooling? I was only homeschooling 4, possibly 5. I think that my 12-year-old daughter might have been in pre-K at the time. So it might have been 5 kids that I was homeschooling, but I was just wiped out and I was discouraged. So when he asked if he could go back to school, I asked the younger kids if they would like to also, and they said yes because, well, I didn't make a good impression on them with homeschooling, I've got to admit. I completely ruined any sorts of hopes that they had of learning at home because I was too drawn in to what I thought education was supposed to look like. So 2 years they actually spent in school, and I'll get into all that happened during that time in another video. But suffice it to say that 2 years later, I really started to miss my kids. And believe it or not, I missed homeschooling them. And I knew that we couldn't do things the way that we originally had done it because I knew that I would just take my kids out of school again and they would hate homeschooling all over again. And I didn't want that for my kids. So I started reading up on all sorts of homeschooling methods. I read some John Holt, and I've got to say that John Holt completely transformed the way that I look at learning, especially his book, Learning All the Time. So when I did pull my kids back out of school, let's say I was a little more prepared about what homeschooling was really all about. And I was determined that I was not going to make the same mistakes. So after I pulled the kids back out again, it was no more school at home for us. And I'm not going to say that I did everything perfectly well, and I'm not going to say that I do everything now even perfectly well. There are times even now that I start to get a little stressed out thinking, oh, my kids aren't doing enough, I have to make them do more. And it always comes down to the fact that I finally realize that my kids learn more when they're actually interested in what we're doing and when we're applying it in a real life sort of way. So our homeschool before the kids were sent back to school was very school at home, strict, structured. After I took them out of school the second time, it completely changed. You know, we went from doing worksheets on amphibians to going to the creek and having the kids look for minnows and tadpoles and finding clutches of eggs, the frog eggs, they're called clutches, I think. And it went to going for lots of walks, you know, going to the park, being outside a lot, doing a lot of hands-on learning. And the textbooks, I've got to say, for the most part, went out the window because I found that that was a really big hindrance for me. The textbooks always brought me back to that way of thinking that school is the only way to do things. And I don't know why. Why do so many people think that? Because if we look at public education in the U.S., I can't speak for other countries, but public education in the U.S. is not good. So why do we try so hard to imitate it? It's not working for them. Why would it work for us? So I think that when I finally was able to let go of what school was supposed to look like and embrace the learning that happens in everyday life, you know, the learning that happens when you read a book with your kids and they are able to take that into their playtime and start applying things that you read about to them into their actual playtime. Like my kids used to go outside and pretend to be churning butter when we were reading the Little House series. As I said before, going to the creek, that was huge for us because my kids are outdoor kids. And I will never forget the one time we went to the creek, and there was an elementary school right by the creek that we were at, and there was a class that was also taking a field trip. So there my kids were in the creek, you know, waiting around trying to find all this cool stuff that they could bring home. And this class, they just kind of filed by the creeks all in a row, single line. They each had a paper in their hand. I don't know what they were looking for, but they had some sort of worksheet in their hand. And all they did was walk past the creek in a single file. They turned around and went right back to the school. And it was at that point that I saw my kids in the creek and I thought, I love homeschooling. This is what homeschooling is all about. Homeschooling is freedom. It's not being constrained to what the bureaucrats tell you that school is supposed to look like. Homeschooling is making learning work for what works for your family. Doing the things that interest you, doing them in a way that interests you, and learning to let go of the notion that there is only one way to do things. So I really hope to encourage you with this today because, again, I'm going to tell you, we really found our love of learning again when I was able to let go of school. So if you are at that point where you're struggling with this, where you're struggling with trying to recreate school, I'm going to just tell you, if you can feel it in your heart that it's not working, then it's not. Take that step out of that box that school puts you in and do things that work for you, because I'm telling you, you will enjoy it so much more. Your kids will enjoy it. You'll become closer as a family. And when they learn, it will actually stick. So that's all that I have for you today. And I hope that you have a great day.